Okay, so welcome. We are delighted to have all of you here. My name is Bailey Harrington. I'm one of the co-hosts or co-chairs of the Editorial Freelancers Association um, and Editors Canada Academic Editing Chapters Book Club. Um, my co-chair, Letitia Henville, who represents Editors Canada, is unable to be here today. Um, but if you would like to help with the um, I'm doing too many things at once. So we're running this event as part of the Joint Association Academic Editing Group. If you would like to volunteer to help us with our work, please visit the EFA's Academic Editing Chapter website. I will be putting that link into the chat in a second. Today, our host is Catherine Jampel, sorry. Catherine uses she, they pronouns. She offers developmental and line editing for academics writing books and journal articles in the social sciences and humanities, as well as editing for grant and fellowship applications. Her PhD is in human geography, and her book, Scales of Inclusion, Disability, and Work in the 21st Century, is under contract with the University of Minnesota Press. Catherine, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay, unmuted. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy June. Happy Friday. So we're here today to discuss the art of academic editing. If you look at one of our guests, Leslie's background, you'll see the little orange squares in the background on her shelf. So that's a fun dimension of Zoom. And so we're discussing that, edited by Kara Jordan and Leslie Castro Woodhouse, our two guests here today. I also welcome all of you. I see people saying where they're coming from: South Africa, Amsterdam, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Charlottesville, Virginia, Grand Forks, North Dakota, and on. I won't greet each and every one of you, but we have people from all over the place. So that's really fun. And I think Bailey will be saying something about the Discord at the end. But if you haven't checked it out, I just got to this week and it's very lively and really nice. So that's my own little plug for, hey, I didn't, do this. And if you haven't checked it out, you have to email Oliver directly and you will get a link. And I found it very enlivening. Okay, so before we dive into the book, which is what we're here for, let me introduce our two guests. So we have Kara Jordan, PhD, worked as a freelance academic editor before co-founding Flatpage, an editorial agency and publishing house. She is a copy editor whose specialty is journal articles and book manuscripts. And while her own scholarly field is art history, in which she earned a PhD from the City University of New York Graduate Center, she has worked on manuscripts across the humanities and social sciences. Additionally, as the chief editor at Flatpage, she oversees a team of editors and manages all projects, which has given her oversight into the various types of clients, editorial services, and manuscript genres. She has a certificate in editing from the University of California, San Diego Extended Studies, where she currently teaches advanced copy editing, and is a professional member of the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading and a member of the EFA and ACES. So you can use your little Zoom applause to welcome Kara, while I also tell you about our other guest, Leslie. They co-edited this book that we're talking about today. Leslie Castro Woodhouse, PhD, waving, and with that illustrious bookshelf in the back, runs, I don't think that was the right word, but runs Origami Editorial, which offers developmental editing services and book coaching for academic authors. She holds a PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley, and is the author of Woman Between Two Kingdoms, Darusami and the Making of Modern Thailand, Cornell University Press 2021, based on her doctoral dissertation. She has extensive experience as a journal editor, including a former post at the University of San Francisco as managing editor of the journal Asia Pacific Perspectives. Before becoming a developmental editor and book coach, Leslie taught courses in Asian studies at the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of San Francisco. And you can reach her at editor@origamieditorial.com. So let me say a bit about the book before we dive into it, in case not everyone has had a chance to read it or read it carefully, and also heap some praise on the editors who have joined us today. So what they've done is they've gathered a group of experts to talk about some of the specific stages of academic editing, how it works, how they've done it, how they've come to it, and providing a much needed breakdown of the types of editing and how they differ from and relate to each other. They also have 2 chapters specifically on groups of people or populations that academic editors might work with. And those are titled, I think they worded it very well, Editing for International Authors and for Graduate Students. And the second one, Setting Up Early Career Scholars for Success. So this book is great for knowing specifically what other people do and their processes. That's one of the parts that I found most interesting, was this question of, well, how do you actually go through what you do from A to Z when you start your process and then when you deliver a final product to the author? So for the types of editing that I don't do, I found it very instructive. So if you haven't had a chance to look at them, or you were only interested in maybe the chapter of what you do, I found that very interesting. So it's a great teaching tool. Also, the cover, I think, is pretty dynamic. And I just wanted to shout out a few highlights for me. So in Leslie's chapter, which discusses developmental editing, she made a point about tone and voice that I hadn't really thought about in this way, and I'm going to use it with the authors I work with, which is that authors' voices are something that you want to maintain, but tone is tailored to the audience or the outlet. So there are lots of little gems in here. I don't want to take up too much time talking about my read. We're going to open it up to questions once I ask our authors to tell us a little bit about the story of how the book came to be. So what happens when I open it up for questions is you can either raise your hand using the raise hand function. That'll sort of put you up in an order. I'll do my best to sort of field those questions. If you would prefer to ask a question in writing, you can either put it in the chat. If you like someone else's question, you can make a note of that. We may or may not see that. You can also use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll see share screen, summary, AI companion. You may not see all of these, and then Q&A should be about in the center. You can click that and ask a question that way. And Bailey and I will each be looking at this to see the questions. So Bailey will help me keep track of them, but I'll also do my best to see them and relive my days of online teaching in the deep pandemic era. So that's how you ask questions. But I'm going to start out with asking Kara and Leslie, can you tell us the story of how this book came to be? What was the motivation for publishing? What's the story of getting from the idea to us having it in our hands?
Maybe I'll start and then I'll ask Leslie to sort of fill in some of the things. Hi, everyone. My name is Kara. Lovely to see all of your faces. I feel like we've met in some capacity at a conference or one of the other EFA events. So I'm very glad to be here. And thanks to Catherine and Bailey and, of course, Letitia for having us. We are super excited to be talking to you today about the Art of Academic Editing book, which Leslie and I guess, have been working on for the past year and a half, which, if you know anything about academic publishing, is like a split second. It's so quick. It feels like we started working on this a long time ago, but I know a lot of academic books end up taking years to go from that inception of the idea to coming to publication. So for us, we started to work on this book in summer of 2022, which is only about a year and a half before it actually came out to as a physical book in the world. I have been an academic editor for about 15 years in multiple different capacities. I started out as a freelancer, as Catherine was mentioning, and then I started an agency called Flatpage with a co-founder named David, who's my partner. And David and I really wanted to start publishing books, and we thought, how are we going to start our press? Well, we had already started this agency with lots of different former academics and people who were experts in their own fields of editing, who were already specializing in developmental editing or line editing or proofreading. So we had this wealth of knowledge from a lot of different experts. And we also had, this wider network that was, beyond just the Flatpage community, from having interacted with so many people over the years at conferences and things like this.
So we thought about academic editing as sort of our starting off point because there are so many other resources, not only for the different types of editing individually, like I'm thinking about the Copy Editor's Handbook, of course the books about developmental editing, but there's nothing that's really specific to academic editing, and there's very few professional development opportunities for people who really want to specialize in academic editing specifically. So we decided that a great place for us to start would be with a book about academic editing itself. And I approached Leslie because Leslie and I had been working together as colleagues for, I guess, maybe a couple of years by that point. And we
Yeah.
decided to start working on the book together. Maybe you can take it from there, Leslie.
What's left? What's left to say? What working with Tara though, I started out. I mean, I had started my own business, but I became a subcontractor with Tara's business, her agency, and the book kind of also arises out of some of the needs that we kept bumping into as we worked with academic clients who came to us seeking editing services, but not always prepared with kind of the language around what they needed, or even really, excuse me, an understanding of the different types of processes that they could engage us for. So a lot of the impetus here was both to educate clients, but also to kind of speak to other editors out there. As you know, as fellow freelancers, we constantly are bumping into other people who go, "Oh wow, I would like to do academic editing, but I don't know that much about it." And so it was partly um, a, a teaching sort of impetus with both clients and potential colleagues, because, I think both Kara and I came to editing via academia. This was not plan A, right? This was at least plan B, if not plan C sometimes. And so, we had our own pathways into it that we also kind of wanted to include as part of what we talk about in the book. Because we figure we're also speaking potentially to other academics who may be interested in entering this field. But the bottom line is we really intended for this to be educational for everybody, that it could serve clients, it could serve our fellow editors, it could serve academics looking to make a career change. And that was really our driving goal.
All right, so I will say that I have a whole question bank. I could keep us occupied for the next 45 minutes, but this is a book club. So go ahead, raise your hands, put your questions in the chat or use the Q&A function. If you have any tech concerns or other concerns, you can direct message Bailey or all of the hosts, and we'll do our best to take care of whatever you need.
Well, why don't we move on to one of your questions in the bank about kind
Sure.
of how we
Sure.
put the book together.
Like I said, go back to the days of deep pandemic online teaching. I'm not afraid of a little pause online. So let's see, where would I start? I think that's something that we don't necessarily know about from the book, but I would be curious to hear you all talk about. And Kara, you started to touch on this, that you wanted to have a first book for this publishing venture. So can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to have Flatpage be a publisher, the publisher for this book, and kind of what you are looking for? People in this Zoom room may actually have clients who are interested in proposing to your press. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course. So the publishing is really the impetus of my co-founder, David Hariri, who, when he came on board, really helped me build from an individual freelancer to running a larger business with a larger pool of freelancers, and now we have employees. So part of what he wanted to do in order to grow the business was to have publishing. Of course, we have been doing editing for a long time and know a lot about the different aspects of the editorial process. But there are things outside of that, the production process, that editors don't always get to play a larger part in. Maybe you have if you've published a book or if you've been really involved in the publication process yourself. But it was a way for us really to build out from something that we had already been building for quite a while and felt some expertise in the editorial community. The types of books that we're looking for, I think, are written by thinkers and intellectuals, journalists who are trying to publish in longer form. We, coming from an academic background, though, are really interested in helping other academics access a wider audience. And the great thing about our press is that we do have this editorial agency that's available to help people who don't necessarily know how to write for a broader audience actually access that. And you're talking about tone, and tone is a really great thing to think about when you're trying to access a wider audience. So we're trying to help those academics to access this broader audience through our press. We do have a call for proposals on our website that's available, but I think we're also an interesting thing that is not apparent, undergoing a major rebranding, and we will have a new website in the next few weeks here. So part of that is that we're going to have some more calls for book proposals, and we are looking for other editorial books. So I know we've got a great group of editors here. So if anyone has ideas for books that might jump off the platform from where we've started with this book about a different aspect of the editorial process, or something that you don't feel that's been covered by some of the other books that have come out perhaps more recently, definitely do get in touch with a proposal. We're definitely open to it.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Sophia, and my apologies if I mispronounce your name from the chat, anybody. At what point in conceptualizing your book did you decide to structure all the chapters the same way with the same questions?
Leslie, you're muted.
Yes.
Thought I just unmuted myself. I'll jump in on that one because I think it was kind of my idea in a way. That as Kara and I began to think about and conceptualize this book, and we decided we wanted to we figured out the topics we wanted to cover, kind of all the phases of the editing process and the different processes when it comes to, like, working with grad students, et cetera, working with multilingual authors, the things that we really wanted to include, and to try and keep this thing from getting just kind of, sprawling out infinitely into a really disorganized mess. We thought of kind of asking the same questions of each author to kind of make sure that the same points were addressed in every chapter, and to kind of give it a consistency across the whole book, so that it wasn't that each chapter was like totally different from every other one, which it easily could have been, because these processes can be very different and every editor's experience is very different. So this was a way for us to try and kind of wrangle the structure into a sort of intelligible whole out of a lot of disparate kind of moving pieces. I hope that it's hanging together well, from the reader standpoint. But I felt like from the standpoint of we editors, the people who were trying to kind of herd these cats, it was very helpful as a device also, because it kind of gave us a way of directing each of the authors without being too prescriptive. I mean, we really just wanted to elicit people's experience in the best way possible and try and make it a really complete kind of explanation and experience for our readers.
I think also having all the authors answer similar questions sort of helps the reader to tease out the differences between the different services that are perhaps available. That way you don't have to read a book about developmental editing to figure out what developmental editing is, or a book about copy editing to read what copy editing is. It's all pretty bite-sized within each of the chapters. They're all relatively short. And I think also it's good to have that orientated toward an academic, like specifically an academic editing community, because you don't have to wade through a lot of information about a totally different type of material that you're editing. We are reading about something that we are editing every day. So you're going to learn about the differences between line editing and copy editing, or the perennial question, what's the difference between proofreading and copy editing? And you'll see it through the lens of an academic editor.
So somebody said, oh, I think that's Bailey. I like that this book was so good for reading while taking public transport because it is not too big and easily chunkable. So there you have that format coming in. And I will say that I looked at a good portion of this also on public transport, nifty and easy to carry. Do we have other questions coming up? Otherwise, I have a follow-up, but please do not hesitate to put your questions in. Oh, great. All right. Thomas or Tomas?
Hi, yes, Thomas. Hi, yes, thanks for the book. I'm a beginner, so it's fantastic to find out what line editing is, for example, which I didn't know before I read the book. And I just had a question about the content, because in the line editing piece, the line editor is akin to a co-conspirator and like a co-thinker. But in the chapter before, about helping graduate students, the author of that piece says that anything responding to issues beyond clarity, mechanics, are usually strictly and ethically off limits. Is that because we're talking about a dissertation specifically there, or so there's a big difference between the two approaches there, and I just wondered if it was because it's ethically off limits to interfere with the content of a dissertation, but elsewhere it might be necessary.
So I can take this, given that I've thought a lot about working with graduate students throughout my career. And for a while I didn't, because it's fraught. And they also send you things very last minute. And, there's a lot of issues with working with graduate students. But I think there is somewhat of an ethical gray area about the types of services that you are able to provide to graduate students that you might be able to provide to other full academics who are already on their pathway, who are publishing books or journal articles, and you're able to make a lot more intervention onto their text that you aren't allowed to with graduate students. In fact, in Canada and the UK, there are specific guidelines for how an editor is supposed to interact with the text, and the student might even need to get permission from their advisor. The university might have guidelines about what types of things the editor can do to the manuscript. But really, I think it comes down to, the dissertation or thesis author has a specific relationship with their advisor, and their advisor is supposed to be advising them on the content, meaning everything from the ideas that they're presenting to the structure of the piece to, how it's the entire writing process. That's the ideal, right? Does that really happen in real life? And especially since the pandemic, I think a lot of us are seeing a lot more graduate students are coming to us because their advisors are taking that backseat role, and they're asking for a lot more of these more interventionist types of services. At least at Flatpage, we have talked to a lot of people at writing centers and decided that, we are able to give them at least an evaluation of a manuscript, like a dissertation chapter. And that's just like a written report. It's something that they would be able to get at a writing center if they took their manuscript to a writing center. It's nothing outside of that. But there are a lot of people who will only do light copy edit or just a proofread on a dissertation because they really want to step away from any sort of intervention, because that student is using, or that candidate, I should say, is using that document to get to a degree. And a lot of us know, a lot of work goes into that. And, there's a reason why we have degrees and whatever, whether you believe in it or not, but they should be able to do that on their own at this point when they're writing their dissertation and submitting it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. If I could just interject also, I mean, because I do developmental editing and book coaching, and I also kind of draw the line at grad students that, I do work pretty closely though with several of my clients, kind of with the ideation part of the process and talking about, is this thesis strong enough? Could it be improved? Could it be complicated? What kind of assumptions are you working to complicate with your thesis in your book? So there can be a pretty, deep, in-depth discussion of the ideas when you're working with scholars in editorial context, all the way through the process, really, but particularly in like developmental end, the book coaching end, and pieces like line editing in particular, where it's about kind of the quality of expression. So it's an issue that, as academic editors, I think each one of us kind of has to make that decision about whether and, when we will work with grad students or not, and what kinds of advising we really want to do and get into with our editorial clients. So thank you for that question. It's a good question.
Thank you.
And it's something we're all kind of constantly struggling with.
Thank you. We have, so Ellen, I see your question, which I'm going to bump toward the end because it's about how people can access the book. And we have another question that follows on Thomas's question from Erica. How critical is having a PhD degree versus several years as a PhD student who didn't quite finish a thesis to being a successful academic editor? Let's start with that one. And then Erica will take your second question, but let's give one question at a time to our guests. So
how
Leslie, you want to start with
the
this?
PhD degree? Sure. Yeah, I have to confess, I started out in one place with this question and ended up in another more recently. I mean, we spoke, we did a panel at the EFA physical in-person meeting in Washington, D.C. last year, and this question came up, and I've it's been rattling around in my mind ever since, because I think that our panel made it sound like if you don't have a PhD, forget about academic editing. Okay, and that's not true. It's really not true. It's really helpful, and I think it's really compelling to a lot of clients who are coming from academia. So I don't want to undervalue it, but at the same time, having the actual, like, going the full distance and having a PhD, you know what? There are other stripes of experience that you will be able to marshal to make yourself into an appealing, attractive, totally marketable, successful academic editor. Okay. Now, if you have gotten that far in the process, didn't quite finish the dissertation, ABD, that's pretty far in the process. Okay. And a lot of the pieces that you would need to bring to the academic editing, well, depending on your focus and your specialty, like if you want to do the developmental end and talk more about the ideas and the big picture, I think you're qualified to do that. You're probably definitely, you have some experience around working with texts that you can market. But I would encourage anybody, PhD or not, to get some copy editing training, to make sure that you understand like what the real professional parameters are. But you don't have to necessarily have a PhD. There are people who come from, say, acquisitions, the acquisition side, like they've worked for academic presses. They've vetted manuscripts, so they know what the publisher is looking for. There's a number of those folks out there in academic editing. Also people who have done a lot of thesis advising, worked in writing centers at their university, worked with academic writers so they bring that experience. You can make a lot of, you get a lot of credibility out of that kind of experience. And so it's not impossible, okay? And you don't absolutely have to have a PhD in order to do academic editing, but it really helps to bring some experience of working with academic writers, because that's just what's going to make you more appealing to potential clients. That's what they're going to be looking for. really is, do you get what academic editing, what academic writing really needs to be, and in order to be publishable, and what presses are looking for, what other, peer reviewers are going to be looking for. So, but if you can address those kinds of those elements with your experience and your background, I think it's open to a lot more people than just folks with PhDs. And Kara, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I do agree that having some kind of subject area specialization is also good. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a PhD. For example, if you did an undergrad degree in pre-med, and that might lend itself to editing in medical editing for people who are postdocs or whatever. I think there's a lot of ways that people without PhDs can engage with academic texts. But I think, and Leslie, we talked about this at the EFA, is a big part of working with academic texts is the fact that we're working with academic clients, and academic clients can be very particular. We have a very particular relationship with our writing, with the way that we craft it, with the way that we were trained to write, with the function of writing in our careers and in our lives, and making space for it in ways that fiction writer, it's very different for a fiction writer or a memoir writer or something else. We're using this as something to build our career. It's maybe our passion, but maybe not. Maybe it's not our passion. So I think understanding the academic mindset is a huge part of being an academic editor. And for that, a PhD definitely does help, but also, if you've worked at a university, if you have maybe a partner or a family member who's been involved in academia, I think those can equally give you good experiences to knowing how to handle the types of experiences that might come up or interactions you might have with academic clients based around that.
And maybe that's
So-
a good segue into the subject matter
Mhm.
expertise question. I'm sorry to talk over you, Catherine.
Oh, no, I'll just read it out so that anyone who's like listening on the go can hear the question. But that's exactly what I was going to say is, Kara says, okay, it's good to have a niche. And so Erica's second question, for those of you maybe listening on the go, it seems that a lot of the academic editing mentioned in the book mentions subjects in the humanities. So Erica asks, is there much demand for editing in the physical or life sciences? All right, take us away.
You want to start this one, Kara? Because
Well,
my
Flat Page
answer
is an
is.
agency. We work in the humanities and social sciences. So I think my area of expertise, and probably why it comes off that the book is orientated toward that type of audience, is because that's the background that I and most of our editors come from. I think though that a lot of the experiences and what we describe in the book equally could apply to the physical sciences and STEM and medicine. And we did try and give as much space for that as we possibly could. Of course, there's different jargon for each of the different fields and different writing conventions in, the hard sciences versus in the humanities. We recognize that. But in terms of trying to find clients, is there a lot of work to be had in the hard sciences and STEM? For sure, 100%. And I think especially if you're looking outside of US and Europe into this entire world out there where there are people that need to publish in English to further their careers. And I'm thinking here, like in China, you have to publish a certain number of articles in order to reach the next rung in your career, which is not that different from in the US, but you have to have a certain number of publications. So thinking beyond of first language English writership, authorship. I think, especially if you're going to have those types of, if you're going to offer those types of editorial services to that community, then you have a very broad client base.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and that's just our orientation, that we're kind of humanists. We work with kind of like the softer social sciences. I mean, I work with some political scientists, sociologists, in addition to like historians and area studies, ethnic studies, gender studies. But there is certainly demand, huge demand for STEM editors. And I would love to see maybe a book or some kind of, writing by those editors to talk about those niches in particular. Because I'm sure I know they're there. I just don't know that much about them because I'm not in them. So, maybe that's another, title for Flat Page or
We
editorial
did
series, you know.
At one point, we did consider having a chapter about STEM editing, but we decided that the editorial services were the same as they would be for the humanities and social sciences, and that it would just be covering the same ground if we included that. So
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
little behind the
But I mean,
scenes.
maybe, yeah, I think this is also a good kind of intro to the niche question, because I know that when people are getting into editing and they're fairly new, the temptation is to kind of make your service offerings as broad as possible. You think, I'm going to attract, everyone. I'm going to appeal to everyone. I want so many clients. And it's tempting, but it turns out not to really be that effective. And I think that both Kara and I have learned, that there's ways of addressing various niches with your particular expertise, and learning how to market and package kind of your specialty and what you're really good at, but also the kind of work you really want to do with the kind of people you really want to do it with. And don't be afraid of, you know, figuring out where you want to aim yourself in terms of like the subject areas perhaps you want to work with, and the kind of scholars that you want to work with. Um, I did not plan to, and nor do I delimit my editorial services to other Asianists, although, Asianists are, my peeps, and that's kind of my home base. But now that I mean, I do still attend the annual Association for Asian Studies conference, and I tell you, they're so excited to find an editor who's familiar with their niche, right? Who's from their niche. So I accept all, clients from all kinds of disciplines and outside of area studies. But just to let you know, the people who are in your niche are going to be really excited to find you if you bring a specialty like that. So don't be afraid either to offer some areas of focus. I wouldn't say, be exclusive to only one field or another, but it doesn't hurt to, especially on your website, kind of play up the areas that are strengths for you. Whether it's like I want to do line editing, I want to work with humanists, or I want to do STEM editing. I've got a math background. I've got a master's in this subject or a PhD in this subject, or I'm ABD in this subject, because it just shows your expertise in combination with your editorial skills. And that's of tremendous value, really. Hard to go wrong.
Yeah, we were in an event a couple weeks ago where they were talking about editors choosing a micro niche. And I thought that was a really valuable concept. And I think, at least for me, thinking about my career trajectory, and I think that it's good to choose a subject matter that you're interested in. It might be something that you come from academically, it might be something different. So not only the subject, but also the types of clients, as Leslie's mentioning. Are you going to want to work with grad students? Maybe you've worked with grad students for your entire career and you're sick of it. So maybe you just want to work with postdocs or people who are full tenured professors. You want to think about the types of manuscripts you want to be working on. Are you only going to work with books? Are you also going to work on grant proposals? All these things are going to go and contribute to your visibility on the internet. And that's how you're going to start to get clients who aren't coming to you from word of mouth. And word of mouth is like king as a freelancer if you're interested in freelance editing. You need to be found on the internet somehow. And if you have a website that just says you're an editor and you don't say what type of manuscripts you work on or who you work with, no one's going to be able to find you in the Google search results. So you need to put it out there. I have this sort of classic story of somebody who worked for us who decided they were going to become a humor editor. And they put out a website, and immediately they started to get all of the stand-up comics who needed a copy editor. And they were completely booked out. And I've never heard of this before because it took me
Wow.
years to become like to get enough clients to be full-time freelance, she like immediately became full-time freelance and was able to support herself through humor editing of all things. So I think the more that you can actually siphon it down, the better and easier people are going to be able to find you out there. That's always
Yeah.
a great piece of advice.
Yeah. Plus, I think it lends to, the diversity of our community and the notion that, there's really a niche for all of us. Truly. I mean, I really don't think of my fellow academic editors as competitors because we all have different approaches, right? Different areas of focus. There's things that we do very differently. And I like knowing who my fellow editors are, who I can refer clients to when I bump into somebody who's not a good fit for me or who's looking for something that's just not in my wheelhouse. So don't be afraid to focus, and also don't be afraid to get to know your fellow editors out there, because I've found this to be a tremendous community, truly.
So that's beautiful. That's why we're here. Thank you so much. I want to know if we raised Gabriel or Gabriel, did we answer your question about MA to PhD? If you could reply in the chat. And we have a different, a question that's taking taking us in a little bit of a different direction in the conversation, which is Michelle's. And also you can still raise your hand so we can hear your voice and see your face. It's fun. Are you taking a specific approach to marketing this book to clients who will need academic editing? I find that some academics don't think they need an editor. So that's a question from Michelle.
Mm, mm. Well, I'm telling my clients about this book because I find that a lot of academics just don't even know that we exist. I mean,
Well, they know you
wild.
exist if if you're able to give them
They
the
know,
book.
well, my clients know I exist. But when I've been attending, I attended the Association for Asian Studies conference, and I worked the EFA table at that conference, which was really cool because, and I highly recommend it, because this is a way of actually connecting directly with academics, kind of on their home turf at a conference. Not only that, but like you're in the book fair, they're there to talk to publishers, they're there thinking about publishing. And there you are saying, hi, I'm an editor. I help people get published. Like you struggle with your manuscripts. You needed, somebody to look at it who knows what they're talking about. You're talking about. This is who we are, right? And it's an opportunity to do more of that education. And actually, we're talking with the EFA now about proposing sessions on academic editing at various academic conferences, so as to make the connections more visible and to get more of this kind of education off the ground, because it's so needed. It's so needed. Academic editing, writing is hard. I mean, writing in the first place, writing anything is hard, but academic writing is exponentially harder, and academic careers depend on it. I mean, so we, in a sense, it's great because we have this captive, clientele, but if they don't know about us, it doesn't matter. So I recommend, telling your clients, your prospects about the book, and utilizing it as a tool with clients to kind of express, like, what's the difference between copy editing and line editing? I mean, it took me a long time to learn that difference. And so we all have kind of the work ahead of us of educating our potential clients as well as our existing clients about what it is that we can do for them. Because there's a lot of ways that we can help, from, conceptualizing the manuscript all the way through to creating the index. So that there are a lot of phases that people just don't know about. And we're optimistic that the book will function as a tool for helping educate people on that count.
I think the interesting part of your question is the part where you say that some academics don't think they need an editor. And a lot of people say that academic clients, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, are more difficult than other types of clients. They push back, and we've all experienced this where someone's come to you and they've been really upset at the level of intervention that you've done on their text, and they don't think that they need it. And especially if you worked maybe for a journal or for people who are not coming to you as a one-on-one client in that type of relationship. So, am I looking for those kinds of clients who don't think they need to be edited? Not necessarily. We need to be thinking about how we can spread the word, as Leslie is mentioning, about the different types of services that are available. But I think there's always going to be people who don't want to be edited and that have that difficult relationship with being edited. And a lot, I think also from, thinking about my own academic writing background and the types of feedback that I've got from advisors and from people reading my writing from other contexts, think of that reviewer number 2, that a lot of us have had these really negative experiences with the publishing process or the getting through graduate school and the writing process in general, that there's a fear around it. So there's a lot of I feel psychological things to walls to break down. Also, when we think about our academic clients, that's more important to me to think about than are we going to be getting on all the academic podcasts and trying to sell the book to all the academics. I think that, a lot of these problems are endemic to academia and, we can hope to educate them about the process and what services are available, but I don't know if you necessarily want to work with all authors.
So I have two related questions about credentialing and getting started. So from Gabriel, we have, does a master's offer any credibility related to a PhD or relative to a PhD? So, what does that mean for entering the field? And then also, if you're someone starting out, this is from Dorothy Ann, how can you best get accepted into university writing assistants or writing labs? So 2 related questions, sort of how do you get started, establish your credibility?
I think, of course, a master's degree offers credibility, as that, we were talking about earlier, having a subject area specialization, being able to market. But I think even more so than what level of degree you have, it's are you trained as an editor? Do you know the different professional processes that a copy editor does, for example? I feel like there's a lot of people who hang out their shingle, to use a very old cliche, as a copy editor, and they're not aware of all of the mechanical issues that go into actually performing a professional level copy edit. So if my biggest piece of advice for somebody who's trying to get into academic editing from scratch, or maybe from an academic background, is to try and narrow down what areas of editing you want to go into, and then look into professional development into those areas. And I recognize by saying that there is not always a lot of professional development opportunities in academic editing. In our book, if you have our book, there's an online resource guide that we could talk about more if you wanted to, but we have a lot of different training programs that are listed there for all of the different editorial service types that are available. But I'm thinking here, if you want to, I teach in a copy editing program. I hire copy editors regularly, and I'm looking, not only has somebody gone through the vigors of an academic program, but also, do they have the professional training to be able to do this at a professional level? And that's why I really want people who have done professional development and training and are committed to this as a career versus I can't try people out. I need to know that they know what the process of doing a developmental edit is, for example.
Yeah. I feel like I want to address the university writing assistants and writing lab question, because that's going to be tough. I hate to say it. I don't think that's a really great place to find work. On the average, who writing centers are employing is either graduate students or undergrads. I actually recently investigated the writing center here in where I live in Evanston at Northwestern University, right across the street. It's all student run. Even if a faculty member wants to bring their manuscript in, a student is going to be reading that manuscript. And the goal there is that they're trying to train those students in, writing practices and editing practices. So, it's not, going to be a place where they do a lot of hiring, a lot of outside hiring, and especially if you're starting out as an editor, I think there are better ways to gain experience. But I don't think that university writing labs are going to be a great place to look just for that reason. They're not really looking to hire people outside of student workers for the most part. But working with, like, if you've been in a role in a department where you've edited theses, and worked with students in that capacity. If you are coming from academia and you've done teaching and you've, read student essays, assigned student essays, there's a lot of writing experience involved in just academic teaching practice. So that you can make a lot of hay out of that. That gives you a lot of credibility with clients too. But yeah, if you're really looking for, work, apply to Kara. Kara's company would be a good place to check out.
Thank you. I want to circle back to Ellen's question, as we're going to have to wrap up soon. So Ellen says, it looks like this book is not available on German websites, including the Big Jungle one. Do you have any plans to market the book in Europe?
The Big Jungle one.
The Big Jungle.
You mean Amazon? So the book is available on US Amazon and it can be shipped anywhere around the world. I recognize that that is not ideal. It really has to do with the fact that I'm currently based in Berlin. We don't have the books in a warehouse in Europe or in India or in China. We have all of our books physically based in the United States, so they have to be shipped directly by Amazon to wherever you are, but you are able to purchase it, assuming that you're living in a place that has trade with the United States. You can purchase it. We will be doing an ebook eventually. There is plans for that, but I can't tell you exactly when that's going to happen.
All right, do we have other questions?
There is one more in the Q&A that I'm putting in the Google document too, if you want to look at
Great.
it. And that's probably going to be the last question we have time for.
Okay, so this is from
Yeah.
Daniel. I was warned against trying to get into an academic copy editing career by my former advisor, who said that a lot of major pressers were outsourcing copy editing work to places like India. What do you think of this advice? Is this a serious concern or threat to a career in academic copy editing?
What do you think,
Well,
Kara?
companies are always trying to cut corners and, they've been outsourcing for years. I think there have been plenty of us who have found very fruitful and fulfilling careers as copy editors, regardless of outsourcing. If anyone here has ever had your book published by one of these, generally they're for-profit presses that do it, you'll know exactly the level of copy edit that you're going to get from those outsourced. It's terrible. It's sort of like, what we as editors think about AI. It's like there's a lot of problems with AI written text. You're able to see it, you're able to correct it, you're able to make it into, fluid, whatever type of English you want. We are not going out of style anytime soon. I don't feel like I'm being replaced by outsourcing. I don't feel like I'm being replaced by AI either. I feel like the types of clients that are willing to pay for our services value our degrees. They value the human touch. They value the fact that we're able to give constructive and critical feedback on a manuscript in a way that it's just not possible from various means. So, I think it's really a matter of getting yourself in front of the type of client that you want, the type of client who's going to pay the kind of rates that you need to make in order to survive and thrive, hopefully. But yeah, I don't think that it's not a major concern for me personally. I don't know about you, Leslie.
Well, I have not focused on working directly with the presses. And I think that, if you were going to predicate your entire career on working exclusively with the publishers themselves, that could be a problem, for the reason of the outsourcing. But again, it does come back to what kind of quality of copy editing they are actually providing their clients, and whether those academics, want something or value something more and better. But also, I mean, I think that there's sort of the dream of working with a press who can just continually send you things to edit, and you don't have to think about it and don't have to, put yourself out there and go after clients. And that's lovely when you can establish that kind of relationship with like a publication or a press, but it's increasingly rare. And what I recommend is that when people are thinking about copy editing, is that they think of it in terms of establishing relationships with clients, like so that you aren't constantly chasing one-off project. Okay, because that way madness lies. You can end up spending all your time chasing one-off projects and not making a whole lot of money actually editing. So the relationship end of it comes into play. I think it's important when you do work with clients it's not just manuscript in and beautiful perfect manuscript out, but rather that you're talking with your client, you're engaging them, and you're making your value really clear to them, such that you become a source for them of repeat editing expertise, and they become for you a repeat client, or more consistent income stream. I hate to talk about clients that way, but to get real businessy about it, we're here to make money. We're here to support ourselves, in a sustainable way, and that's the best way if you want to focus on copy editing. But I also recommend thinking about, how you can kind of work your way up the food chain, so to speak. Like, are you good at looking at the big picture? Do you enjoy developmental work? Have you thought about it? I didn't even know it was a thing until I started doing it, essentially. The developmental editing could be a way, to actually be an editor. And then that also led me into book coaching, which is even further up the food chain, if you will. But that's, these are different kinds of relationships that you then get into with your clients. And so that's something to consider as you set up your business. And I feel like I want to turn to Gabriel's question really quickly. It's in the chat about how to broach pricing discussions with your academic clients, especially if they don't have grant or department financing. And that's a tricky one, but I like to get real upfront with clients that this is a service that is going to make their work a lot more publishable. And publishing is really important in academia. It's also going to lead to getting more projects finished. And so there's a huge value to our work. And I know it sounds like it's expensive to some clients. But I recommend that you get really, down into the dirt with your pricing and understand what you need to survive, first of all. Okay, what kind of clients you want to pursue. You're not going to be able to pursue every client. Okay, you don't want every client necessarily. And while I do take clients, who I give particular discounts for people who are first generation, who are independent scholars, who don't have grant or departmental funding, they get a discount if they are paying out of pocket, because I really want to encourage them and support them in their academic publishing journey. But at the same time, they're not the bulk of my business. And I've got a lot of clients who come with grant funding, or they've got a departmental allocation every year that supports them. It's worth exploring with your client, though, whether they have professional development funds that could be utilized for editing. And you can offer to help them make the case with their department for, to request funding for their projects, because it can make the difference between an academic getting their project published and not. And some people, need that to progress in their position. They need it for their tenure portfolio. It really is publish or perish out there. But don't shy away from it. Don't be afraid of it. But just figure out ways that you can work with some of the less funded clients, but also pursue and help people get funding and pursue the people who have good funding as well.
Okay. I'm going to stop us here. And and do some wrap up things. But thank you, Kara and Leslie and Catherine, for being here today and for this discussion, and everyone else for coming and asking your questions. So the book club is going to be on hiatus over the summer. We will be back in September when we will be discussing Karen Yin's The Conscious Style Guide, just out on May 28th. So you can go acquire your copy now and read it over summer. The RSVP details for that meeting will be announced through the Academic Editing Chapter newsletter. You can sign up to receive that on the Academic Editing Chapter page on the EFA's website. The link is now in the chat. Our newsletter is the best way to learn about upcoming chapter events and opportunities to be involved. There's lots of great content in there. And the book club is just one small part of what we do. And now to get to what Catherine mentioned at the beginning, if you want to connect with other academic editors outside of our chapter events, you can now join us over on Discord. The EFA has recently set up a server. EFA members are able to access the full EFA server and should have received an email on May 15th with an invitation to join. If you are not an EFA member, you can still join the academic editing channels of the server. So if you are an EFA member and did not receive the invitation email, you can contact Oliver Ray at the email that I have just put into the chat. I tried to get an updated invite code to share for non-EFA members during this, and I have not gotten, I can't create the link myself and I don't have it currently. So when I get that, I will send it to attendees. So if you're a non-EFA member, you can join this Discord server with a link that I will share later. And that's all. I'm going to stop the recording.